Hello, my name is Brian Kistler, and this video I'm doing today is totally different from any YouTube video I've ever done before. I think this would appeal more to people who have a true love for Spanish language literature, particularly Latin American literature. In any case, I wanted to do a video commemorating the 200th anniversary of the first Latin American novel ever published, El Periquillo Sarniento, Spanish for the mangy little parrot. More about that later. So you may wonder, if you think about it, Columbus discovered America in 1492. So between 1492 to 1816, that's more than 300 years. You may be thinking, what's wrong with this picture? Why did it take so long for any country down there in that part of the world to publish a novel? Well, that's a discussion for another time and a video for another time. In fact, I may make more than one video here because I want this one to kind of be light and relatively short. I probably don't have time for everything. So yeah, El Periquillo Sarniento means the mangy little parrot, and it was called that because the main character's parents, when he was a little boy, sent him to school with a very bright colored cap and a bright colored jacket that kind of looked like a parrot. And he did have mange, and his last name Sarmiento with an M. It almost looks the same as Sarniento with an N, which means mangy. So the kids kind of tortured him and made fun of him and called him that. So I think today, in this video, what I'd like to share with you is just what I thought were some of the funniest episodes, because there are a lot of episodes in this story that are funny. But I might also share with you some that were just very colorful or interesting, because he really does capture a slice of Mexican life at this time in history. So first, I like the episode about Dr. Purgante. And Purgante, that's not an accident there, that name. It has to do with purges, that name Purgante, you know, killing. And I guess the doctor didn't kill everybody, but he killed enough that he got that reputation. So the main character, Periquillo, wound up with him because after his parents died, he was kind of destitute. He was still a young man. And he never really learned a trade. So a lot of times he was living hand to mouth, you know, and just fighting to survive. Other times he was living high off the hog and everything was going right for him. But then in a second he could be decimated, broken to a million pieces, and be poor again, even starving sometimes. So he relied on the help of any stranger that he could, and sometimes these were employers. So Dr. Purgante took him on. And in this episode, I don't remember if Dr. Purgante was just out of town and Periquillo was filling in, or Periquillo decided to take the skills that he learned from Dr. Purgante and open up his own business as a quack doctor. But the funny thing is, in this town where the population of native Indians was very heavy, he just got lucky at the beginning. He didn't know what he was doing, and he just kind of, maybe some of what Dr. Purgante showed him paid off, but they thought he was a miracle worker at the end, at the beginning, and he knew nothing about what he was doing. And his renown, his fame grew, and they all thought he was a wonderful doctor, but eventually it caught up with him. Before it did catch up with him, there was this priest in town who could see right through him, knew exactly what he was, to the point where the priest put him on trial in front of some committee. And it was just very funny. I mean, Periquillo, when he was on trial, he was just very proud. He was arrogant. You know, he thought he could just explain everything away, trying to bully them, you know, using Latin phrases. Although he never learned a trade, he had a lot of academia that was the exact opposite of learning a trade. He knew Latin well, so he just used a lot of flowery speech angrily and Latinisms, and he thought that that would just take care of everything. But the priest could see through all of that just like he could see through him to begin with. So the priest put him in his place, and the whole courtroom just roared with laughter at him. But Periquillo just doubled down. I mean, he wasn't going to let that stop him. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he didn't let that stop him. He just got more and more angry, more and more arrogant. And somehow he wiggled out of that one, squeaked out of that one, without losing the ability to practice. But eventually, it all caught up. When things went wrong, the people in town, especially the Indians, I mean, if you remember that scene in Frankenstein where the villagers came with the torches at night and the pitchforks outside that castle where Frankenstein was, it wasn't exactly like that. It was kind of like that. They ran him out of town, and he had to get his mule and just leave town as quickly as he could. And then he had to start all over again from scratch. And his place, his home, they tore that apart. They threw stuff out the window onto the ground. So that was funny. And then another story that I liked was when he was helping a dentist. And this poor old woman came in. She needed a tooth pulled. And I guess they had some kind of anesthesia back then, but it wasn't like today. And again, he didn't know what he was doing. And the poor woman relied on him like he could take care of that problem she had with a rotten tooth. Well, he tortured that poor woman. He didn't mean to. He wasn't trying to be evil. But I mean, Fernandez de Lizardi, the author, goes into detail. She screamed, the horror, and she cursed at him, called him names, and he tried to calm her down. But how do you calm someone down when they pretty much have figured out you don't know what you're doing? So that may seem kind of gruesome, but it was just so funny the way the author explained it. It was hilarious. And then his dad really wanted him to learn a trade, and his mother didn't want him to. His mother was very proud of her heritage, which I think had a lot of nobility. She thought that labor was beneath him. And, you know, the dad wasn't going to listen to the mother at first, but the mother started crying, and the father loved her just so much that he decided to, you know, let the son decide what he wanted to do. So I don't remember that time if he went to just study Latin, but I do remember one of those times when they had that conversation, he decided he wanted to enter the priesthood or become a monk. So he went to a monastery and he just thought he had it made. He thought, oh, this is going to be an easy life. But it was funny because Periquillo loved to dance, he loved to drink, he had an eye for the women. I mean, he's just a young man to begin with. And it was just so funny. He found out pretty quickly this was not at all what he had bargained for when he entered the monastery. A lot of time alone, a lot of discipline, denied all kinds of pleasures. It was like being in prison, and I don't remember how he got out of there, but it was just so funny how he bemoaned and bellyached, oh, what have I gotten myself into? And there were times that, there was at least one time he was thrown in jail, for which he deserved. And again, I mean, we do feel sorry for people, but you know, one of the best elements of comedy is we laugh at some things that go wrong, partly because it's not happening to us, but also partly because we can imagine. So when he was in jail, the same thing. I mean, he bemoaned how awful it was, and he was a coward. He was scared of everything. I think he was even scared of a mouse, and I think he had one person in prison who was nice to him that helped him out. But Fernandez de Lizardi just went into so much detail, his travails in jail. And let's see what else. Well, as far as one of the more colorful adventures, he went sailing to the Philippines and he got shipwrecked. And that was really very interesting that he got shipwrecked. And, you know, Fernandez de Lizardi went into detail of the Asian people from that part of the world that Periquillo came in contact with. And the people over there just had a completely different personality from what he was used to, and a curiosity. And I think he tried to explain his way of life in Mexico, and he just kind of confused them. So there was a little humor in that, even though it was more a colorful, interesting story. And Periquillo had one friend from childhood. I think his name was Juanario. They called him Juan Largo. They took the name Juanario and kind of split up in two words. Juan Largo. He was tall. He was really tall, and largo means long. But Juan Largo was one of those people. He acts like you're his friend. He acts real buddy, but behind your back, he's plotting to make a fool of you, or, you know, do something that'll blow up in your face. And that's what Juan Largo did. And then Juan Largo wouldn't see him for a long time. Then he just happened to run into him and say, Periquillo! And of course, Periquillo wasn't exactly the nicest name to call him. His name was Pedro Sarmiento. But I mean, almost any time he ran into Juan Largo, it led to something bad. Let's see, what else? Well, to move on just to one interesting thing about him, about the author, a lot of Fernandez de Lizardi's writing in this novel, and in other works that he did, was that I think he borrowed from Cervantes a lot, Cervantes who wrote Don Quixote. I could go on and on about all the similarities between Fernandez de Lizardi and Cervantes in El Quixote, but one thing that I do remember that I'll tell you just right now, there were a lot of coincidences, and this had to do with characters who you wouldn't hear from for a long time, and then all of a sudden they would appear again, and you didn't know who they were at first. It took a little while, but then all of a sudden it was revealed, oh, this is this person from back long ago, many, many chapters ago. We didn't think we would hear again. And now here is the person again, and maybe Periquillo didn't recognize him at first. And that's what happened with Juan Largo the last time that he met him. Juan Largo had turned his life around and was a good man, I believe a man of God. And Juan Largo, he didn't reveal who he was when he was helping Periquillo for a long time. But finally the Savior, the salvation, who was like a man of God, and he finally told him, I'm Juan Largo. So yeah, there were a lot of coincidences like that, especially with characters. So what else could I tell you? Well, as far as what kind of literature this is, it belongs to the genre of romanticism. Romanticism in the sense of real love for one's country, one's fatherland, or just a yearning for freedom, a yearning for independence. So that's a big part of it. Another part of this literature is realism, and there are many different ways to define realism, but I'll just say with realism for me, like the one aspect that I see here, realism goes into kind of sordid, unpleasant details, kind of earthy things, things that in some cases might be a little disgusting, maybe a little bit graphic. So there's a bit of that. I guess you could say, for example, that whole episode pulling the woman's tooth, that could be one example of the many examples of realism. And then this is also picaresque literature, and picaresque literature is when you have a character, as I was saying, who lives hand to mouth. One moment he's on top of the world, the next minute everything is wrong, and he's just starting all over again. And he's really kind of, from moment to moment, just doing everything, fighting tooth and nail to survive. And the main character in picaresque literature, at least in Spain, is called a pícaro. And that's what Periquillo was for most of the novel. A pícaro is kind of a rascal, a rogue, someone just short of a criminal. And in all honesty, sometimes just for survival, he was like a criminal. And it's also an episodic form, adventure after adventure after adventure. So in many ways, Periquillo Sarniento is a picaresque novel. So, yeah, that pretty much sums up the kind of literature it is. Now, let me just read to you a little bit. There was a man, Dr. Jefferson Ray Spell. He was a professor at the University of Texas, and he published an exhaustive book, The Life and Works of José Joaquin Fernandez de Lizardi. He published this in 1931. I don't think anybody else has written so much about Lizardi's life or his works. So let me read you a little bit towards the very end of his book, what he had to say about Lizardi. And I may skip some of it. Lizardi, as the author of El Periquillo, would hold an enviable place in Mexican literature. He created the first Mexican novel. Remember, as I keep saying, I think even more impressive, the first Latin American novel. He brought that form of fiction down to the level of the common people. He linked the Mexican novel in peculiar fashion with that of a typical form of Spanish literature. In his attention to realistic detail and local color, he was a forerunner of the costumbristas. That's for another video. And he turned the attention of later Mexican authors to the fascinating material offered by the colorful life about them. Had he been less of a teacher, he had a lot of interruptions that were very moralistic, didactic, pedantic, where he was criticizing and preaching. So, yeah, but the people of his time, they would just breeze through those. They would ignore those and go back to the story. They didn't spend a lot of time in those digressions. But back to that comment, where was I? Had he been less of a teacher, had he felt less obligation to better the condition of his fellow countrymen, Lizardi would have been a greater literary artist. Yet through El Periquillo, with all its defects, the Mexican people have been brought to see themselves as he saw them, and the world has been given the opportunity to know them as he did. For in that work, more than in any other, Lizardi caught the spirit of the Colonial Mexico and immortalized it. And there's a whole lot more I could say about what Lizardi was trying to say and how this work, El Periquillo Sarniento, came to be, because it didn't start in novel form. It was a compilation of another genre that he wrote, and eventually was all bound together as one. But I guess I will just say, I usually read the unabridged version of El Periquillo Sarniento. There's two versions. There's one that's 425 pages, I think. That's the abridged version. The unabridged version is over 1,100 pages. And basically what they're cutting out are all the many, many digressions where he kind of gets off topic, gets away from the story before he goes back and goes on a crusade with ways he thinks that Mexico could have been better. So anyway, I hope you liked my video, and I hope if you haven't read it, if you know Spanish, maybe you'll try and read it, or there are English versions of it. There is a translation of The Mangy Little Parrot. And I don't know, this may be it. I might not need to do another video. I'll think about it, but I just think it's so wonderful to recognize this man in this novel 200 years after it graced the literary world. So, bye.